A loving father, a jailhouse imam, an accomplished poet, and according to almost everyone, an innocent man was executed by the state of Missouri. This is the story of Marcellus Williams and how millions of people were deceived. We were told DNA had exonerated him. Witnesses against him were known liars, and even prosecutors said he wasn't guilty. Yet the state still killed him anyway.
And as far as I'm concerned, any human being should speak out against it, but especially if you're black. This black man was murdered yesterday. Let's call it what it is. It's murder. There's no excuse for it.
It was supposedly another example of how the system abuses black men. I needed to dig into how, in today's America, an innocent person could actually be executed. I spent hours researching and read hundreds of pages of court documents and transcripts, and along the way, I got madder and madder. Because basically, everyone was full of crap. Activists and the media just ignored or outright lied about the facts that clearly showed his guilt. Now, I'm not arguing here about whether the death penalty is good or bad, just that Marcellus Williams is 100% guilty, beyond any reasonable doubt. I'm Ken LaCorte. On this channel, I often look into uncomfortable subjects where answers aren't clear-cut, and I explore the nuances of issues. This isn't one of those videos. It's a forensic look at how a completely fake story was sold to millions of people. I'll lay out and link to documents, and by the end, you'll never fully trust the media again. We'll look at the crime in depth, the legal process itself, the claims put out by the Innocence Project and others, and finally, you'll understand why the St. Louis Prosecutor's Office jumped to his defense. Let's start on August 11th, 1998, in Universal City, Missouri, just west of St. Louis. Everything I say here came from court testimony and documents, and afterwards I'll bring up the defense's counterarguments. Marcellus Williams. By the age of 29, he had a long history as a career criminal with 14 convictions, mostly felonies. They were armed robbery, burglary, assault, theft, stealing a car, and the unlawful use of a weapon. And those were just his convictions. He was also suspected in a long string of burglaries that never went to trial. That day, he was looking for another home to rob, and he drove his grandfather's Buick LeSabre to town. He made his way to the home of Felicia Gale, who people called Leisha. She was 42 years old and a former reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She lived in a quiet neighborhood with her husband Dan, who was a radiologist. Williams later said he chose that house because of a large tree that concealed the front door. He broke a window right next to it and he reached through to let himself in. Leisha was in an upstairs shower, and when Williams heard her there, he went back downstairs where he rummaged through her kitchen and found a large butcher's knife. Leisha had heard him in the kitchen, called out, and came down the stairs. When she did, Williams attacked, first stabbing her in the shoulder, cutting out a chunk of her flesh. Then he stabbed her 42 more times and left her dead with the knife sticking out of her neck. For a little bit of context, Williams was 6 feet 6 inches tall, and Leisha was just over 5 feet. She was no threat to him, and there was no way she could have fought him off. Williams then went to an upstairs bathroom to wash off. He grabbed a jacket to hide the blood on his shirt, then stuffed her purse and her husband's Apple laptop into his backpack before leaving back through the front door. Leisha's husband would discover that bloody scene and his wife later that evening. No one saw him at the murder scene, and he left no incriminating evidence there. So how did investigators connect him to the murder? Fortunately for police, not only was Williams evil and vicious, he was pretty stupid. After the murder, he made his way back to his grandfather's car and then picked up his girlfriend, Laura Asaro, who wondered why he was wearing a zip jacket in the summer heat of St. Louis. When he took it off, Asaro noticed that his shirt was bloody and that he had scratches on his neck. He told her he was in a fight, and later that day, he threw away his bloody clothes in a sewer drain. Asaro also had seen the stolen laptop in his car, and the next day, she went through the trunk and found Leisha's purse and identification. She confronted him, thinking he had another girlfriend, and Williams then confessed to killing Leisha, describing it in excruciating detail. When he was done, he grabbed her by the throat and said if she ever told anyone, he'd kill her, her children, and her mother. And for over a year, Asaro shut her mouth. 2 weeks after the murder, Williams was arrested for an armed robbery of a donut shop and thrown in the St. Louis City Workhouse. It was a medium security jail. There he shared a cell with a guy named Henry Cole. And one evening, a TV news report came on about Leisha's murder, and Williams couldn't help himself, blabbing to Cole that he had murdered Leisha, and then over the subsequent weeks describing more and more details. Now, for those of you wondering why murderers talk about their crimes, it's just a thing that happens all the time. Many years ago, my own sister was murdered by a complete stranger who, like Williams, just talked about it for no apparent reason, and he would have never been caught had he just stayed quiet. In Leisha's murder, police had made no progress, so her husband put up a reward of $10,000. When Cole, the cellmate, got out of jail, he learned about the reward and went to cops. This is about 10 months after the murder, and it was the first break in the case. Importantly, Cole told them details that were never publicized, like how the flesh was cut out from her arm and how Williams left the knife sticking out of her throat. Cops started investigating Williams, although it took him 4 months to find his former girlfriend, Laura Asaro. Even then, she still wouldn't talk. They had to go back to her multiple times. They pressured her hard, offering to go easy on some smaller crimes she had committed. When she finally opened up, she led them to evidence directly linking Williams to the murder. She told them about the car Williams drove that day. It didn't run anymore, but it was still at the grandfather's house. Police searched it, and in the trunk, found a St. Louis Post-Dispatch ruler and a calculator that belonged to Leisha and had fallen out of her purse. The girlfriend also led cops to another man named Glenn Roberts. He was a neighbor of Williams' grandfather, and Williams sold him the Apple laptop just a couple days after the murder. Roberts still had that laptop, and police tied it to Leisha's husband. Prosecutors indicted Williams for Leisha's murder. And then, 3 weeks later, when he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for another crime, he tried to break out of jail, assaulting a guard with a metal bar. At the murder trial, the defense argued 2 main points. First was that the cellmate and the girlfriend were both incentivized to testify, him for money and her for leniency. Absolutely true. Williams' lawyers painted them as criminals and liars, and this is often the case in crime testimony because hardcore criminals like Williams usually hang around troubled people. But prosecutors emphasized that the 3 witnesses I mentioned each had inside knowledge or direct links to real-world evidence besides just their words. The other main claim of the defense was that there was a lot of evidence at the crime scene that didn't match Williams. There was hair, footprints, and smudged fingerprints that prosecutors couldn't tie to Williams. Investigators explained that's fairly common. Houses accumulate a lot of DNA over the years. And they and the former cellmate said that Williams had wore gloves. It wasn't a super whodunit. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. But convicting Williams was just the beginning. Legal challenges and appeals for death penalty cases are essentially automatic. There were many appeal points submitted by his lawyers, some that argued he was innocent, with most saying that elements of the trial itself were unfair, essentially that the judge didn't follow the law. It's why executions are rare, and when they do occur, it's almost always decades after the crime. The defense team said that the car search was illegal, that jury instructions about note-taking were improper, and that the prosecutor shouldn't have been allowed to have mentioned his escape attempt. A point of contention was that when Williams sold the laptop, he told the man that his girlfriend had given it to him, something the jury wasn't allowed to hear. The trial judge and later judges ruled that that was inadmissible secondhand hearsay, and that Williams would have had to have said that himself in court, but he didn't testify. His appeal lawyers claimed that the original defense team was incompetent, not fully exposing the characters of the witnesses against him, or talking about his childhood trauma enough. They claimed prosecutors improperly excluded potential black jurors, ending in only 1 African American on the jury. And then there was the DNA. We've heard a lot about the DNA on the murder weapon, which was tested multiple times over multiple decades. You see, early tests had showed DNA from 2 other people were on the knife and excluded Williams from that, which his supporters said totally cleared him. DNA technology improved, and later testing tied the DNA to the prosecutor and an investigator who'd handled the knife during the trial, not to some unknown killer. The justice system looked at all of those claims in detail. There were at least 15 judicial hearings, 20 years of appeals. The case was reviewed at all court levels: the Missouri Circuit Court, the State Supreme Court, U.S. District Court, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. Throughout all of them, not one judge or court found enough merit in any of his claims of innocence or improper procedures to warrant a new trial. To give you an idea of the efforts put in by prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges, just one document submitted to the Supreme Court was 486 pages of legal arguments and testimony. But none of that mattered to the people who wanted him freed. And while courts consistently upheld his conviction, a different narrative was taking place in the court of public opinion, starting with the activists. Now look, there are always protests against the death penalty, and that's totally understandable. There are good people on both sides of that issue. In fact, even Leisha's widower said he didn't support an execution, although he didn't argue Williams was innocent. The highest profile group claiming innocence was the Innocence Project, which says it's helped free hundreds of innocent prisoners, often through DNA. It was founded in 1992 by 2 of O.J. Simpson's defense team, who was also quite guilty, by the way. And that group has a popular reputation worldwide. It has about 100 employees and a $20 million yearly budget. Some people, like Actual Justice Warrior on YouTube, are highly critical of it. He calls them Antifa with law degrees and says they've fabricated evidence to free stone-cold murderers. He's done an interesting video on them in general, and he's the only other person I found anywhere online who did his research on this case, so props to him, and links below. I haven't dug into the Innocence Project deeply on a number of cases, but in the handful of ones that I did, I wasn't impressed. In this instance, though, they out and out 100% lied about facts and concealed others. These weren't mistakes, it was intentional deception. They had the standard stuff, broad claims of racism and criticism of witnesses who get money or leniency. But on top of that were specific lies. They accepted at face value that unidentified evidence at the murder scene was from another killer, completely ignoring that Williams wore gloves. They spent a lot of time talking about the unknown DNA on the knife, yet conveniently left out that it sourced back to the prosecutor and an investigator. And that was a well-known fact. And they also falsely stated that neither Williams' girlfriend nor his cellmate told police something new, which is a bald-faced lie. They completely ignored the items in his car, and they brushed off the laptop because he said his girlfriend gave it to him. But the Innocence Project is well regarded by many people, including many reporters and pundits who just seem to take their word at face value. Searching through dozens of news reports, it was obvious that very few reporters ever did what I did, which was actually read court documents to find out the facts that others just ignored or completely lied about. It always makes you wonder in cases like this, are they lazy or are they liars? I mean, clearly the Innocence Project knew what it was doing. And it's hard to imagine that, for instance, Natalie Alyan wasn't being deceitful when she wrote 2 long articles for USA Today that played up numerous defense points, but not one word of the clear evidence pointing to Williams. She and her editor should be fired, along with dozens of other reporters throughout the country. On the other hand, many people read those articles and believe they're being told the truth. Like actress Helen Mirren, who read one of Williams's poems on television.
This was written by a poet, Marcellus Williams. How strange it is to become aware of another's heartbeat, but forget one's own. Finally, love. That makes me cry.
I doubt she had any idea she was blubbering over such an evil man. But I want to end by talking about one man who absolutely knew the truth and was part of the scheme to deceive us all, the St. Louis prosecutor, Wesley Bell. He was a big reason that people thought there was something really off about this case. I mean, prosecutors are supposed to send people to prison, so when they say someone might be innocent, people pay attention. His office filed a long motion to stop the execution, and it too was rejected by multiple courts. And what most people outside of St. Louis don't realize is that Bell is one of those new progressive prosecutors elected in the wake of the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson. Bell ran against mass incarceration, systemic racism, and pledged to never seek the death penalty. And, true to his word, his office touted that after the first 100 days, they had reduced the county's jail population by 12%, taking it to its lowest level since 2002. He'd previously worked as a public defender and still acts that way. And it harms the system just as badly as if a public defender was somebody who wanted to send people to jail instead of actually defending them. In St. Louis, it has one of the highest murder rates in all of North America. The U.S. has a rate of 5.5 murders per 100,000 people each year. Chicago, known for its high murder rate, has a rate of 23. St. Louis, it's averaged over 60 for the past decade. That's 4 times as high as Chicago and twice as high as Mexico, still in the midst of a cartel war. For that, and a number of reasons, people are fleeing. In the last decade, about 12% of the residents left altogether. And the people who still live there are the biggest victims of this misinformation campaign. To the average person living in St. Louis, authorities out and out murdered an innocent black man. That's what they read, that's what they saw on television, and it's shameful that the political leaders, the media, the Innocence Project, they all spread that wrong message. That hurts that community and it hurts the country. And in this instance, the thing that really sucks is that they're all going to be rewarded. The Innocence Project will raise more money off of the case and use it as an example of why they're needed now more than ever. The NAACP, Black Lives Matter, they all have another example of why they're needed to fight this racism like never before. The news media got their ratings and clicks and they pushed their ideological agenda as well. And Prosecutor Wesley Bell, he just won a Democratic primary and will soon be headed to Washington, D.C. as the newest congressman from St. Louis, Missouri. You know, it's vital that we don't send innocent people to prison or certainly to execute them. We all know that. Yet there's a flip side to that as well. When someone is murdered, it's important to find and prosecute that person, not only for justice, but to lock up a very dangerous person. You'd think that with all the new technology, that'd be easier every year, but it's exactly the opposite. In the United States, cops make an arrest in barely over half of murder cases, and it's getting less each year. I dug into that as well, and the story of why and who that affects most is fascinating and sobering. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more, and come back again.